we know it's a tubal pregnancy, because there's nothing in the uterus, but your levels are telling us you're pregnant. They can do things to kind of flush the tube out, clear it out, and then that way you can just, you know, you don't have to try again. So there's going to be, you know, issues with that you're going to see. You will hear talk from the doctors about testing tubal patency. Anytime you want to test the patency of a tube, you want to check and make sure that it's open and that things are flowing through, okay? So even if it's like your ureters, okay, we can test the patency of the ureters just to kind of make sure that, hey, we put some dye in, make sure dye goes in and out and it works. Same thing with fallopian tubes. You go and you get some dye injected. We want to make sure that we see it come out the fimbriae. If we put it into the uterus, you want to see it come out of the fallopian tube. That way we know it went in the uterus and through the tube, okay? And that way it's open. If we put dye in and nothing comes out purple, then we know we have a blockage somewhere, okay? And the egg won't be able to make it to the uterus if the dye can't go from the uterus out, okay? Then you hear about patency. I do want you to add on there, and it doesn't come on page 388. If you look in the note pages, I want you to add the ampulla and the isthmus, okay, just like you see on your PowerPoint slide. So you're going to have your fimbriae, you're going to have your infundibulum, your ampulla, which is just basically the longest section of your tube, okay, and then you have your isthmus, which is where it's going to start narrowing, where it's going to be connected to your uterus. And then they'll have a little segment right here that just is kind of like your opening, the gateway from, you see how it says uterotubral junction? Your tube is connecting to your uterus at that point, okay? So fimbriae, infundibulum, ampulla, and isthmus. I want you to look at all of those. All right, we're not going to go over blood and nerve supply to the fallopian tube. Back to that fallopian tube slide, the last note I have is the intramural region. It says it's located at the top portion of the uterus. And again, this is where it's going to be continuous with the isthmus. Like I said, that little region where your egg's going to exit the tube and actually get into the uterus. Okay, so make sure you look at the parts that I have listed in your note pages. You will have to identify a photo with the segments of the tube, okay? All right, on 388 where it says uterus. All right, so uterus, they tell you, is like a pear-shaped organ, okay? It has layers. This is a very muscular, thick layered organ because we have to be able to expand, pull a child, and then contract and push the baby out. Okay, so that's why we have a really thick muscle layer. All right, so it says it's hollow, pear-shaped muscular organ on which the fertilized ovum is implanted and the embryo develops. The primary purpose of your uterus is to sustain and protect the development of the embryo. The broad ligament is the primary structure that keeps it in its anatomical position. So there's the broad ligament again. And it tells you it extends laterally from the uterus all the way to the pelvic walls and the floor. The two other ligaments that are going to be attached they talk about is your round ligament and your cardinal ligament. Okay, so we already kind of mentioned it once before in the note pages. Now they're mentioning it again, your round and your cardinal. Okay. Basically, it says our uterus is equivalent to the spermatic cord in the male. During a hysterectomy, it says the surgical removal of the uterus, the ligaments that are cut to free the uterus. Okay, so we can't just go ahead and rip the uterus out. We have to ligate and divide every ligament. Okay, so that broad ligament is you'll hear them call it leaves, like the leaf of the broad ligament. Okay, because it's kind of wide and spread out like that. Okay. That's why when we teach you, we're doing a lot of clamp, cut, tie, or pop-offs, okay? Or it's just going to do a harmonic scalpel, one that cuts and divides all in one thing, Okay, we have a lot to dissect because you have to start from the fundus and go all the way down, dissect as much as you can, and then we have to learn to cut it off at the cervix. Okay, and then sew up the hole where the cervix was attached, because you don't want to leave an opening from your vagina to the inside of your abdomen. Stuff's gonna fall out. Okay, so we got to make sure we close all that up. Okay, so hysterectomies you're gonna learn. I think we teach it over the summer. So she'll do like OB. I'm gonna do the GYN portion of it. Okay, so that way we'll cover everything at once. But when you're looking at box 17.2, they introduce you the steps for a hysterectomy. Okay. On your note pages, I put you some acronyms to look at, because when you're scheduled, you on the board, you gotta kind of see what you're setting up for. You're gonna see the acronyms on your board. Okay, they're not gonna really go and write out the whole procedure. So you have to know your med term. Very important to know med term for this. Okay. So whenever they tell you you're doing a hysterectomy, there could be more questions though. Well, what kind am I doing? First of all, am I doing a laparoscopic assisted one? Am I doing a vaginal one? Am I doing an open abdominal one? Okay, I need to know what kind of hysterectomy I'm going to do. So then they're going to schedule it as a TAH, which is a total abdominal hysterectomy. That means we're cutting the abdomen and we're doing everything through the abdomen. If it's an LAVH, then it's a laparoscopic assisted vaginal hysterectomy. So we start doing pneumoperitoneum. We take everything down laparoscopically. And when I say take everything down, I mean we're dissecting ligaments. Okay, we're disconnecting things. We do it laparoscopically as much as we can. And then we go to the vagina while they're in lithotomy. And then we get into their vagina and we start dissecting that way and pull it out through their vagina. Okay, so that way we laparoscopically assisted and taking it out through the vagina. Or you can have a total vaginal hysterectomy, which is pretty easy if someone hasn't had kids before, or maybe just one kid, or they're really elderly. And, that way we don't have to open up their belly at all, but like it's enough elasticity because things get looser that we can just go through their vagina and you have the cervix and we'll start cutting in to the cervix and open it up and then pull it all out. We flip it and pull it out. Okay. But there has to be certain maybe previous history, when you do an H&P on, that's going to determine what kind of hysterectomy you're going to have, okay? So those acronyms on that note page is very important. It'll go with what's in your MedTerm book, okay? The BSO is bilateral salpine oophorectomy, okay? So B is bilateral, so that means I'm taking out my uterus, both tubes, both ovaries. Or it can be a TAH RSO, LSO, so I'm only going for the right or the left side. If it just says TAH, then I'm leaving the tubes and the ovaries and I'm just taking that uterus and the cervix. Okay, y'all follow at home too? So depending on what acronyms are being given, you have to know what you're taking out, okay, and what to expect in that surgery, what to expect as far as specimens go. Okay, you have to know that. Okay. They can remove any structure, from the female reproductive group. So, if they just want to go ahead and take one ovary, one tube, two ovaries, there's so many different options to put together. They just have to make sure they book it right and you know what you're going to do, okay? And make sure you verify your specimens if it's going to be a right and a left situation, okay? You want to make sure that you have your rights and your lefts confirmed. And everything's going to be straight. So you don't need to go and read box 17.2 thoroughly and study from it. They just are kind of letting you understand this is how we do a hysterectomy of a TAH BSO to kind of maybe it might help you when you study. Okay, so you can read it, but I'm not pulling test questions from it. Okay. The sections of the uterus. Real easy. Your fundus, your body, and your cervix. 3 sections. Remember, I told you your fundus is always going to be the top portion of an organ. Okay? Body is always going to be the biggest kind of middle part of it. And we all have a cervix. Okay? We should all know we have a cervix. You go to GYN, you get a pap smear done. That's what they're checking for cervical cancer. So there you go. Fundus, body, and cervix. Okay? You have different layers, okay, for your uterus. So it says the wall of the uterus is composed of 3 layers on the bottom of 389. You have endometrium, which is your inner layer. And if you've ever heard of like an endometrial biopsy or you're shedding endometrial tissue, that's what's happening when you're having like your period, okay? You released an egg, it didn't fertilize, we shed the lining, that's the endometrial layer, okay? If you've heard of endometriosis, which I'm sure you have, okay, that means you have endometrial tissue cells that are implanting somewhere other than the inside of your uterus where they should be. So that's why sometimes they get on the outside of your uterus, they attach to your ovaries, to your pelvic walls, they go anywhere but on the inside of your uterus, okay, and it's painful. So that's where endometriosis comes from the term endometrial for the lining. The second middle layer is your myometrium. Myo means what? Muscle. So that's why it's called myometrium, and it's the thickest, okay? This is basically what's going to help push that baby out of the cavity when it's time to contract, okay? You're going to hear about a myomectomy when we do GYN procedures, and it's because we're taking fibroids, which I'm sure you've heard of, off of the uterus, okay, and they grow from that muscle layer. That's where they originate from. So it's not a cancerous tumor, it's just a tumor of the muscle layer that's protruding either into the uterus or outside, like it's pushing through, and that's why they have big bumps all over the uterus, okay? Then your last outer layer is your perimetrium layer. Remember, that's your serosal layer, okay? And it says it'll cover the uterus and some of the cervix. So endometrial, myometrium, and your perimetrium is your 3 layers that you need to know. And make sure you read it. If it's going to say list them from inner to outer or out.